Finally, at last, Manchester United have confirmed that they will be sticking with their manager Erik ten Hag ahead of next season. Welcome back to the Football Tribe YouTube channel. 𝐷𝐵𝐾𝐒 is my name. Thank you to all our new subscribers and thank you to all those that have dedicated their time to watch our content every time we put out a new video. If you're new to the channel, I do encourage you and request that you do subscribe to the channel and do not forget to turn on your notification bell so that you can be notified once we do publish a new video. Otherwise, continue to like, comment and share on our videos so that YouTube can do its magic. Anyways, welcome back to the channel. Like I said, Manchester United have decided to stay with manager Erik ten Hag. This comes after 2 weeks of keeping the Netherlands manager waiting on the wings while he spent his time on holiday in Spain, waiting to hear from his bosses back at Old Trafford and Carlington respectively on their decision ahead of next season. Well, it appears they have decided to stick with him, and reports do suggest that they are already in talks with the Dutch manager to extend his stay beyond next season. As things stand, the manager only has 12 months left to his contract, although according to Sky Sport, they do say that in his current contract, there's an option for Manchester United to extend that stay for another year. But as part of condition in Erik ten Hag's demands, he has requested that former South African striker Ben McCarthy's contract at Old Trafford also be extended because it is due to expire at the end of this month. Ben McCarthy was brought in as the strikers coach at Old Trafford. That was in Erik ten Hag's first season in Manchester. So the confirmation does come after a fortnight of a review during which Manchester United is a top brass that is under the stewardship of INEOS, the football controlling part of Sir Jim Ratcliffe, who has since taken over 25% of the club, reviewing the season that was last season, where they finished 8th in the Premier League, their worst position finish in the Premier League era, but also managed to lift the FA Cup as they beat Manchester City by 2-1 in the final to ensure that they will play in Europe, or that they will feature in the European competitions next season. So they will be playing in the UEFA Europa League. My gut feeling tells me that this is not the decision that they ideally would have wanted to go with, because during that fortnight long review of last season's activities, of course, they did consider factors that United had suffered through a plethora of injuries all throughout the season, including one of their key summer signings in Mason Mount, who spent the better part of the season on the sickbed through injury. The likes of Luke Shaw, the likes of Lisandro Martinez all struggled through injury. At some point, they did lose Rasmus Højlund. They did lose Christian Eriksen. They did miss their defensive pivot in Lisandro Martinez and Rafael Varane, and all those things. So they were indeed troubled by a lot of injuries. So while they reviewed all those things, but other factors are remaining constant, it is reported that their preference was to consider their options of getting a new manager. And under the lead of Jason Wilcox, the new technical director, my gut feelings tells me that his first option was to let go of Erik ten Hag if they could come to an agreement with their desired candidate for a replacement, and that was none other than the former Bayern Munich coach in Thomas Tuchel. It has been widely reported across the English media and beyond that Manchester United did have conversations with multiple managers who they thought could be potential replacements for Erik ten Hag, and among those included Thomas Frank of Brentford, Mauricio Pochettino, formerly at Chelsea and PSG, as well as Tottenham Hotspurs, not to mention Southampton previously, and Espanyol. Reports also go on to allege that they had interest in Ipswich's Kieran McKenna, but their solid #1 candidate was Thomas Tuchel, formerly at Chelsea, who thinks he has unfinished business in the Premier League. So that is the man that they wanted to take over the reins at Old Trafford, but the two parties could not come to an agreement, with Thomas Tuchel saying he would like to take a sabbatical. Basically, he wants to take a break away from managing any team or any footballing affairs at the moment, after his exit at Bayern Munich, where Vincent Kompany has since been named as the new manager on a 3-year contract. So once that deal fell through, once Manchester United couldn't convince Thomas Tuchel, I think in their considerations, in their overall review, it came down to plan B, or the second best option, which was sticking with manager Erik ten Hag at the moment, who only has a year left to his contract. Now, again, according to their season review, they did conclude that the club did face a number of problems, and there's a lot of issues that need to be fixed, including the rebuilding of their training ground, that is Carrington, the fixes at Old Trafford. We all saw that leaking roof during Arsenal's 1-0 victory at Old Trafford, among other factors revolving around the management or the day-to-day management of the club. And it is an Ineos have already started on processes of overhauling that structure. That is why they brought in a new technical director, Jason Wilcox. There will be a new chief executive officer, as well as a new sporting director at the club, all who will be working with manager Erik ten Hag to ensure that things run smoothly at the club. But among the reasons they do continue to cite for deciding to stick with Erik ten Hag is his promotion of young players, and most importantly, citing Alejandro Garnacho as well as Kobbie Mainoo, who have been quite revelations between last season and the season before that, because we first saw Alejandro Garnacho break onto the scene, and then just this concluded season, we did see Kobbie Mainoo, who was a pivotal player for this Manchester United side, and did even score in the FA Cup final as Manchester United beat up against Manchester City to lift their 13th FA Cup final. So they do think that in the new structure that they do want to develop, that promotes young players, that promotes young talent, they do think that Erik ten Hag is the ideal candidate to further that objective, given that he has already exhibited those examples of Alejandro Garnacho and Kobbie Mainoo, not to mention that the likes of Willy Kambwala, the centre back there, is also lacking in there in the defense. We did see him feature a couple of times last season. If it all goes well for him, he could be a mainstay in the first team squad. But again, I would say we've seen this kind of script before, because during the reign of Louis van Gaal, another Dutch manager that had been at Old Trafford, who was sacked, I think, in the aftermath of an FA Cup triumph, that was back in 2016, he had also promoted a good number of young stars, including Marcus Rashford, who broke onto the scene during his reign, the likes of Axel Tuanzebe, among others. So, if I'm Erik ten Hag, I'll take that with a pinch of salt. So, because you never know with youngsters, sometimes they bust out and they're very, very decent players, and then one season later, they are not as good as you thought that they would be. We all saw that, I think, on Tom Cleverley. For those of you that remember that 2010-2011 season at Manchester United, I thought he was quite a liberation for that Manchester United side, as they were preparing, I think, to bid farewell to then Paul Scholes during that time anyway. So I wouldn't bet myself too much on the youngsters, but that is one of the reasons that they did side. The other was, of course, that some of their new signings needed to, bed in, to settle in well. That is Rasmus Højlund, who did have a decent season, but the injuries he did struggle with in some moments of the season, but also the limited supply in terms of chances created by Manchester United. So you couldn't really blame him that much. But that's not to say they've not had players that have underperformed, because Antony was one of those. Anthony Martial did struggle through injury all season, and he has since left the club at the end of his contract. When you look back, when you rewind things back, this is a player in Anthony Martial that was signed from AS Monaco, at the time when Louis van Gaal was still at the club, with the hope. I remember and coming to the know that in his contract there was a clause that if he would win the Ballon d'Or, then Manchester United would pay Monaco some bit of extra money. And then, of course, there was that clause when he hits the 25 goal mark. I think Manchester United were supposed to pay what was it, 5 to 8 million pounds to Monaco in bonuses and all those things. And I do remember his first game when he faced Liverpool and scored that Thierry Henry-like goal, and everybody was like, wow, Manchester United do have their own Thierry Henry in the making, in Anthony Martial. But he was hot and cold during his spell at Old Trafford, and eventually he has had to leave. Anyways, personally, I do think it's because things did not work out with Thomas Tuchel, that they couldn't perhaps convince him all that he wasn't just willing to take on any managerial roles at the moment, that they have decided to stick with Erik ten Hag. Is it the right decision? Yes and no. It depends on how you slice it, because he did finish 8th. They did perform horribly in the UEFA Champions League, but like we've just mentioned, you don't want to blame him so much because of the injuries he has had to contend with. But one would also argue that other clubs also did have their own injuries to contend with almost all throughout the season, and yet they still tried to perform. Newcastle could be a good example. They didn't finish where they wanted to finish, but I mean, they also struggled with injuries. And if you compare Newcastle to Manchester United, one could easily argue that potentially Newcastle almost had a better season, bar the FA Cup triumph for Manchester United. So those kinds of things. So it depends on what way you look at this. But for me personally, I do think it's the right decision to make. I have not always thought that managers were to blame for Manchester United's poor performances. Yes, they are partly to blame, but not entirely. I do think there's quite a lot of other factors that have affected the club over the years, ever since the departure of Sir Alex Ferguson, I think at the end of the 2013 Premier League season. So ever since then, they've had David Moyes, they've had Louis van Gaal, they've had Jose Mourinho, they've had Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, they've had Ryan Giggs in there as an interim when they fired David Moyes. Of course, they've had Erik ten Hag, and if you fired all those managers, the 4 permanent managers, and then you still want to fire Erik ten Hag because you think it's not working out, then the question becomes, who is it ever going to work out with as far as managers go? At what point do you call out the players to say, guys, maybe there's something wrong with our playing structure? We've all had the rumors of the big boys in the Manchester United dressing room. That's not to say that there are no big-headed players in that Manchester United dressing room who are quick to sometimes disagree with managers, either on tactics or on what they would regard as perhaps mistreatment in their own views. We've also had those rumors that from certain circles within the Manchester United squad that sometimes they do not understand why Erik ten Hag is overworking them in training and all those things. So again, I do believe it's the right decision to retain him, give him another chance. The third year, it becomes his make or break tie for the year, depending on how he performs in the Premier League. Because for the first 2 years he's been at the club, I do not think he has disappointed. First season, lifted the Carabao Cup. Second season, he's lifted the FA Cup. That's no easy task to do, because, I mean, the first season, when they won the Carabao Cup, they also qualified for the UEFA Champions League. So those are 2 ticks in the box there. They did play this very decent football. By that game, I think, was it a 4-0 loss against Brentford? And then, of course, moving into the second season, we saw how it all transpired. They did struggle for consistency, but in his justification, they did struggle with one too many injuries at the time. But then again, they did end up with a piece of silverware in the FA Cup. So clearly, if anything, Manchester United do owe Erik ten Hag another chance to say, have another crack at this. Let's try to continue to rebuild this squad, this new project. Let's inject in, let's bring in some players. And I mean, we have already discussed on this channel the key priority targets as far as Manchester United players that they do want to sign in the summer are concerned. If you've not yet watched that video, it's already do check it out on the channel. Perhaps you'll get an insight on the kind of targets that Manchester United are looking at, including the likes of 𝐒𝐿, just to mention but a few. So they are giving him another go at it. I do think that Manchester United will spend heavily in this transfer window. Maybe not on maybe an individual player like the way they went big, paying £72 million for Rasmus Højlund, but I do think they will spend their monies on multiple players to try and rebuild that squad, right from the back line up to the up front in the attacking lines, including the mention that they do need another striker to help out on Rasmus Højlund, especially now that Anthony Martial has also left the club. So do let me know what your thoughts are about Manchester United deciding to stay with Erik ten Hag and the idea that they are going to award him another contract to extend his stay at Old Trafford. Do let me know what your thoughts are on all those things. Otherwise, stay locked on the Football Tribe YouTube channel. Do not forget to like, comment, share, and do subscribe to the channel if you're new. Otherwise, have a blessed rest of the week, and I'll see you next time.